Good morning and welcome to this session of our program, All Things Jewish Virtual Discussion. I'm Rabbi Stephen Snyderman, Temple Beth Israel, Longboat Key, and we are opening up these discussions now to the general community. The procedure which we've been using for the past several months has been that I talk for a little while and then we open this up to Zoom discussion, and wherever the discussion goes, within reason of course, that's where we go. Our topic for today, as advertised in the Jewish News, why Old Testament is not a Jewish concept. Let me begin by talking about the absolutely obvious. We are speaking and most likely thinking right now in English. We use English terms, but English is not a Jewish language. In English, there is a lot of implied Christian terminology. For example, on the political level of discussion of church and state, we understand that that means separation of religion and government, but we Jews are not a church. Sometimes we use these terms because it's just the way people speak, but they're not Jewish terms. And if we want to talk about a collection of books written by Jews generations ago, what term do we use for what we would call the Bible, an English word that comes from the Greek that refers to books, what Christians call the Old Testament? I would like to talk about what's wrong from a Jewish perspective. From a Christian perspective, I understand they're coming from a different place, because old means old. Old means obsolete. Old means superseded. There are those who think we share the Old Testament with Christians. But it's not over the biblical books where we have agreed. That's where we have disagreed. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, if I haven't made the point clear, I'm going to let something speak for me. And that is, I have it right here. You can see it, and it seems to come and go in the screen, the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Interesting that I read this stuff, but I have to know what's going on. Christians, therefore, read the Old Testament in the light of Christ crucified and risen. Such typological reading discloses the inexhaustible content of the Old Testament. In other words, these books that we call biblical books are understood in Christian terms. Besides, the New Testament has to be read in the light of the Old. Early Christian catechesis made constant use of the Old Testament. As an old saying has put it, the New Testament lies hidden in the Old, and the Old Testament is unveiled in the New. Now, however we view our sacred books, which we have inherited, we do not think the New Testament is hidden in them. And if there is anything that is veiled, and we don't think there is, but if there's anything that's veiled, it's not unveiled in the New Testament. Now, since the books that the Christians call the Old Testament are important and sacred writings to them, and important and sacred writings in Western civilization, in European and American civilization, we have said, okay, maybe there's a place for us. As part of our acceptance into the general society, our sacred books are viewed as sacred by the majority religion. And this is part of the idea of acceptance. We're not completely different. I think there are significant differences that are overlooked, and maybe it's good to overlook them. So, for example, when I have heard on multiple occasions, and meant not in any sense of animosity, you Jews have the Old Testament and we Christians have the Old Testament and the New Testament, they are trying to say, we at least share something with you. Now, part of that is that we're finished. We're old. We're done with. They have continued. I don't think that's the case. I'm going to say more about that in a moment, but I'm going to give an example. When there are public religious commemorations, and a community Thanksgiving service is an example, more often than not, assignments are given out and the rabbi, the Jewish representative, is asked to read something from the Old Testament. I would prefer that our sacred texts are not so limited. And why not, on Thanksgiving, when we give thanks for food, we don't read from the text of the Birkat Hamazon, the words of prayer and thanks which we give after we eat, not found in the biblical text, though the proof text for it is there, but in rabbinic literature. Well, we have a lot more than the Bible, or what Christians call the Old Testament. For generations, Christians didn't realize that. And the turning point, I can talk about this in another session with you, when the church decided a better way to convert the Jews, and this is in the Middle Ages, was to learn Hebrew and understand what was going on in the Jewish world. The Franciscans and the Dominicans realized there was more to Jewish texts than just the Bible. They discovered the existence of the Talmud. We'll talk about the Talmud in a couple of weeks. They found there was more to being a Jew than just reading the biblical text. And for them, maybe that was wrong, maybe that wasn't good, but they discovered what we would call the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, the idea that on Mount Sinai, God did not just reveal 10 commandments or the 5 books of Moses, but all of rabbinic literature. Now, I have to put something in big parentheses here. This twofold revelation at Sinai, even if you do not believe it ever happened, even if you believe that this is a later invention of a myth to justify the antiquity and therefore credibility of the rabbis and what they taught, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because this is what Jews believed. This is how we saw ourselves. This is how we see ourselves. So again, let's talk about something that's very common and very normal in Jewish life today. A Passover Seder. You're not going to find a Passover Seder in our Bible. You're not going to find, and I'm only being half humorous here, you're not going to find a good recipe for charoset in the book of Exodus. Now, when we see, and there are many examples of, let's say, oil paintings, sketches, prints, and so forth, of some old Jew, it has to be an old Jew with a white beard, studying a sacred book. That person, I should say that man because we're talking about the pre-modern period, would not be studying the Bible. He'd be studying the Talmud, or more specifically, the commentaries on top of the commentaries on the top of the commentaries. When we get to the Talmud, I'll try to show a page. Here is a huge page, a small block of text in the middle, and commentary on top of commentary on top of commentary. We don't read the text all by itself. What's Martin Luther got to do with all of this? I'll tell you. Martin Luther came up with the idea in his opposition to the Catholic Church that we shouldn't believe in all these traditions. We should get back to Scripture as it originally was, sola scriptura, only the Scripture. Well, that privileged the biblical text from a Christian perspective, Old Testament and New Testament. And in a sense, many of us in the modern world, Jews, will say the Bible is sacred, okay, but this ridiculous practice of yours of not eating cheeseburgers, that's rabbinic and that doesn't count. Or as I've heard, and in the context of classical Reform Judaism, what is the difference between the Bible and what is man-made? Well, maybe it's all God-made and maybe it's all man-made, but from a Jewish perspective, it was seamless. How do we know, for example, what is really forbidden on Shabbat from a traditional perspective? The biblical text doesn't tell us. The rabbis work it out. And it's not just biblical text, and it's not just biblical text as Christians understand it. Or if you really want to get into hot and heavy topics, which we're not going to do today, I'll just mention it. What is the Jewish position on abortion? And I don't mean necessarily just the modern Jewish political position where we're going to allow different groups and different individuals to do their own thing. What is the most restrictive? What is the most liberal? And it's not biblical. It's spelt out in rabbinic literature. And again, whether you accept it or not, it's not, as so many people have said to me, show me where it says in the Old Testament. Well, that's another story. Now, what do we call then this collection of books? And let's move backwards. There's a book sitting on the table here. I want to know what the book is. I open it up. I look at the title page. It should say the title of the book, the author, the place of publication, the date of publication. These are all modern, recent things. Look at a Torah scroll. And we're going to be celebrating Simchat Torah pretty soon, and we can see the very beginning of the Torah scroll. There isn't a title page. People didn't do it that way. It says Breshit bara Elohim. Breshit, the first word, that's the name of the book in Hebrew. Genesis is the English word which comes from the Septuagint. That's another story completely. We have different terms for these collections of books. There's one that I sort of like at the moment, and it's just to be a troublemaker, the Esrim V'Arba, the 24 books. It's a neutral term? All right. Another term would be Tanakh. Tanakh for Torah, the 5 books of Moses. Nevi'im, the books of the prophets. Ketuvim, the other writings like Psalms and Proverbs and Job and the 5 Megillot, the 5 scrolls, and Daniel, Ezra and Nehemiah, Chronicles. And by the way, a footnote of footnotes, I didn't say 1st and 2nd Chronicles. I said Chronicles, how you divide these things up, again, differently in different terms. Come to a Shabbat morning service. If I am going to be precise, and I try to be, but I'm sloppy, sometimes everyone is, I am not taking the Torah out of the ark, I'm taking the Sefer Torah out of the ark, the scroll of the Torah. And on that scroll, we have written Genesis through Deuteronomy, the 5 books of Moses, or to use a fancier term coming from the Greek, the Pentateuch. But Torah is more than the Pentateuch. Torah is all of rabbinic literature. If I am studying Torah, I am doing more than just reading the Bible. And interesting enough, there is again a significant difference, and this is getting above and beyond the issue of how we interpret it. There is more to us than just the biblical text. Now, I'm going to try to summarize a little bit of what I just said and try to open us up to the discussion which follows. But part of my goal in all of this is to help us understand ourselves on our own terms. If I'm at some sort of reception and somebody comes up to me and says, where in the Old Testament does it say? Maybe this is not the time to pick a fight about terminology, though other religious groups and other political groups certainly have. So, for example, a couple of generations ago, we may have referred to people today we would call Muslims as Mohammedans. Look at your old college textbooks. They have made it very clear to us that that's inappropriate. We Jews have tried not to be so aggressive, and we are grateful, in fact, that there's any acceptance of us, and maybe we can sit down and talk about things without having a fight or an argument. But if we really get into the meat of it, if I go to a church service and they are reading Psalms, hey, this is as Jewish as it gets, but they're reading it from a different perspective. The Lord is my shepherd. Who is the Lord? Okay? Now, I'm not saying one group is right or one group is wrong. Obviously, I have my own feelings personally above and beyond my professional commitments, obviously. It is fascinating, for example, to see how other religions will take our texts and read them so radically differently that, oh my gosh, I never would have thought of it that way. Passing through the sea, Noah and the flood, water. Anytime you mention water, you think of baptism. I don't. It's just fascinating. So Old Testament is the Christian book. Tanakh, or written Torah, or whatever other term you want to use, would be our terminology. Now look at what we American Jews did. Many of you received as a gift for confirmation the old Jewish Publication Society edition of the translation of the Bible, called the Holy Scriptures, published by the Jewish Publication Society. This was revised and revised and revised from the 50s and 60s on, and the final edition of everything in one volume in 1985. First edition, second edition, because of different terminologies. The New Jewish Publication Society Tanakh. We don't know what word to use because it's a collection of books, not just one. And in those books, there are contradictions. I'll have more to say about that in another class. But let's try to summarize right now. I'm talking too much, and I know. I want to offer first, if there's enough interest, to continue this topic maybe as a separate Tuesday morning, or I'm open to another morning in addition, just way of looking at things where we take all the terms we have used about ourselves and reevaluate them and have a different level, or maybe, I hope, a deeper level of who we are and what we are. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to give you the opportunity to raise questions. I'm going to share with you in advance that we're going to talk in future weeks, if you don't have the ad in front of you, who created the Jewish Bible. It didn't just come down from heaven one day, and I am going to really say some wild things. In other words, there were certain people in first century land of Israel who didn't walk around with a Bible under their arms. Nobody did. Everything was on scrolls. That's another story. I want to go into the question of what is the Talmud, and I'm not speaking there as a Talmudist. I have no right to do that. I'm talking as a student of Jewish history. And then I want to try to tie everything together. So when we modern Reformed Jews in 2020 in the United States are praying from Mishkan Tefillah or Mishkan HaNefesh, what would a Jew from a previous century who was parachuted, boy, I'm mixing, that's not the best metaphor, but anyway, parachuted into Temple Beth Israel of Longboat Key, what would he or she recognize? And would it be something completely alien? So please be courageous, make comments, give me feedback.